Chapter 11, Retirement and Estate Planning. Retirement planning and estate planning are plans to create and protect the accumulation of wealth. Specifically, retirement planning is finding the best way to protect the life you'd like to live after you stop working, whereas estate planning protects what you have even after your death. When thinking about the life that you'd like to live after you stop working, you have to think about all the expenses involved, such as housing, healthcare, food, taxes, and the leisurely things that you want to do in retirement, such as gardening, travel, hobbies, shopping. Retirement planning is really going to be a combination of things that will help fund your retirement. And some of the best tips is to start as soon as possible. And if your employer offers any kind of retirement benefits, make sure to take advantage of it. Invest in stocks and try to save 15% of income during your working years. But how do we know how much to save up? Well, when thinking about these expenses, you have to think about your lifestyle as well as adjust it for inflation. And thinking about how long you're going to be in retirement, that depends when you retire and how long you expect to live. And then also understanding what the return on savings in retirement will be. So let's break down the specific things that you need to estimate. First off, you need to estimate what your annual expenses will look like. It can be helpful to take a look at your current living expenses and the inflation. So the average inflation rate in the United States is about 2%. So you can see here in the formula, let's say we assume that you spend $25,000 per year to maintain your standard of living. So we'll take the $25K and we'll multiply that by 1 plus the inflation rate of 2%, exponent 30 years. So we would need about $45,284 per year to maintain your standard of living 30 years from now. In other words, in 30 years, $1 will buy only about 38 cents worth of today's expenses. And we learned this calculation back in Chapter 4 regarding time, risk, and value. In this case, the $25,000 is the present value of your expenses, and you were looking for the future value, given that your expenses are going to increase at a rate of 2% per year for 30 years. Now, in terms of the length of retirement, in general, we're living longer thanks to medical advances, healthier lifestyles, access to medical care. And so we have to think about how long you're going to be retired for. Do you plan on retiring early? That's going to lengthen the time of your retirement. Are you retiring at 65? You could live another 20, 30 years after the age of 65. Then there's the amount needed at retirement, and that's going to depend on your rate of return. While you're retired, you're going to be taking money out of your savings, but the remaining retirement savings that you have is still going to be earning a return. So the more return your savings can earn while you're retired, the less you have to have saved by retirement. Whereas the less return your savings can earn in retirement, the more you need to have saved before retirement. So it is helpful to be conservative when you're estimating what that rate of return is going to be. For example, here, our conservative rate of return is 5%. Lastly, you need to think about the annual savings you need for retirement, and that'll depend on how many years you have to save until retirement. So we can see here in the table, someone that only has 15 years left until they retire would have to save a lot more on a monthly and annual basis to hit that goal of $920K they need for retirement, assuming a 5% return rate. Whereas if you started early and you've got 40 years until you retire, so let's say you want to retire at 65 and you're 25 right now, then you won't have to save as much on an annual basis. You could save about $635 or a little over $7,600 a year and still hit your goal, assuming that 5% rate of return. And so to recap, you're going to have to save more for retirement if your expenses are higher, you're retired for longer, and your rate of return is less. Let's talk about the different ways to save for retirement. The first is employer retirement accounts. And so this is where employers can offer a pension or retirement plan to their employees as part of their employees' total compensation. Such benefits are a way to attract good workers. There are two kinds that an employer can offer. The first is a defined benefit plan or pension plan. So this kind of plan is paid for by the employer. They're going to set aside money for you for your pension, and they're promising to pay you after you retire. The other kind is the defined contribution plan. So each employee has a retirement account, and the employee can put their money in from their paycheck into the retirement account, and the employer can match or contribute into that account as well. This kind of plan belongs to the employee, and so if you leave the employer, it goes with you. Defined contribution plans are lower cost to the employer because they're contributing less, and it's the opportunity to shift the risk of investing funds onto the employee. Let's take a look at a few more characteristics, just so you can see the difference between the defined benefit plan or pension plan and the defined contribution plans, like a 401k. So again, here under the pension, the employer is the one that's making the investment decisions and putting money into the pension plan. It stays with the employer. So if you leave the employer, they're no longer going to, and contribute more to your pension. So for instance, I have a pension from the first company I worked at, and when I retire, I'm going to get some money from that, but not as much as someone who stayed there like 20, 30 years. There's going to be a monthly defined payout, and there's a certain number of years that you have to work for the employer. So this is known as vesting. So this is the time that gets credited towards your retirement benefits. So for instance, at that company I worked at, in order to vest, I needed to be with the company for 5 years. Whereas in a defined contribution plan or 401k, which is the most popular one, you are controlling your investments. Both you and the employer make contributions, although the employer is making less. Maybe they're matching the first 3% that you contribute, dollar for dollar. It always stays with you. So if you leave the company, it's your money, you get to take it with you. You just have to roll it over to a different kind of account, and we'll talk about that later. And there's a variable payout because it depends on how well the plan's investments perform. And in terms of like timing requirements, it's usually shorter than a pension plan. In this case, examples could be like 3 to 12 months of employment. While 401k plans are the most common, there are similar types for other entities. Like there's the 403b plan for employees of nonprofits and 457 plans for employees of government organizations. All of these offer employees a pre-tax way to save for retirement, and then employers can make a tax-deductible contribution. When looking at job offers, it's helpful to understand what your employer offers. Do they offer a pension? Do they offer a 401k? Some even offer both. Then there's Social Security. So the federal government offers a mandatory retirement plan for all citizens except for federal government employees and railroad workers. This is funded by a mandatory payroll tax that is paid by the employee and the employer. This tax is commonly referred to as the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, or if you look at a paycheck, it says FICA. And so FICA funds Social Security, and it also funds Medicare. So you can see here the breakdown of how much your employer pays and how much you pay to Social Security, which is a type of retirement, as well as Medicare. And even with the combination of employer and federal retirement accounts, it's possible that it's not enough to fund your lifestyle in retirement. So it's also helpful to have individual retirement accounts, or IRAs, and these were created in 1974 by the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. So IRAs are personal investment accounts, and they can be invested in a wide range of financial products: stocks, bonds, certificates of deposit, mutual funds, etc. Now, the types of IRAs that you can choose from differ in terms of the tax treatment of contributions, how you do the withdrawals, and the limits of the contributions. Let's take a look at the two common IRAs. There's the traditional IRA and then the Roth IRA. So there'll be like limits to age on the traditional, but not the Roth. The traditional IRA does allow for tax-deductible contributions, whereas the Roth IRA does not. And when you withdraw from your traditional IRA, these are taxed. So in this week's module, I have some videos comparing traditional and Roth IRAs in more detail, as well as some strategies related to Roth IRAs. So definitely check those out if you're interested. So let's talk about rollovers, which is where you're going to move money from one retirement account to another. And there are a variety of reasons why you might do that. Maybe you're leaving a job, so you can take the 401k money from your first job and move it to your next job or into the 401k account over there. Or if you don't want to do that, you can actually move it to your own individual retirement account so you can manage it yourself. It also allows you for more investment options if you are comfortable with investing your money on your own as opposed to having someone else do it. For me, I've worked at a variety of companies, and so I had numerous 401ks. So I wanted to combine or consolidate them so it'd be easier to manage, which also would lower the fees that I was paying to have those accounts. And then for some, there may be a change in tax treatment, so there might be some tax benefits for doing a rollover. Now, if you're doing a transfer, this is where you're moving a retirement account like a traditional IRA from one trustee or asset manager to another. Maybe you're not happy with your current asset manager and you want someone else to take over. Now, rollovers and transfers are not taxed if you do it within the 60 days of distribution. So you just want to be careful to follow the rules because there can be penalties if you do it incorrectly. Just a few more plans to be aware of in case you decide to be an entrepreneur and open up your own business, whether it's just for you or opening up your own business with a couple of employees. There are self-employed individual plans that you can do. The first is the Simplified Employee Pension, or SEP. This allows an employer with no employees or just a few employees to contribute deductible retirement contributions to a traditional IRA. Then there's the Simple or Savings Income Match Plan for employees, and this is where employees can make salary reduction before tax contributions that the employer will match. So this is kind of like a 401k. And then there's the Kyogi plan for small or self-employed folks. It can be a defined benefit like a pension or a defined contribution plan like a 401k with deductible contribution limits. With estate planning, it's helpful to know some of the key concepts. So your estate is everything that you own, and estate planning is a way to manage your assets after you die. Intestate is when you die without a will or any kind of written instruction on how to disperse your assets or your estate. So the laws of your state, like California, of where you are legally residing, will dictate how your estate will get distributed. Since you won't be here, it's helpful to have a written document outlining your instructions regarding your estate. This is known as a will, and the will is your legal request for the distribution of your estate or the assets that remain after you pay off your debts. So what that means is if you have any debts when you die, the assets in your estate are going to be used to pay them off. Your credit card debts, your medical debts, things like that. And then anything left over is what will get distributed to whoever you want. We're going to talk about a variety of aspects when it comes to estate planning. And it's important because you're planning for how to provide for your family after you're gone. It helps to transfer the assets to whoever you want to receive them faster, so there's no disputes. It helps to reduce the taxes on the estate, can help to plan for disabilities, and it gives you more control over your estate as opposed to letting like the laws of your state of residence dictate. Because what happens is something called probate. This is the legal process of validating a will and administering the payments of debts and the distribution of assets by a probate court. Probate courts also will help manage to distribute property if you don't have a will. But by having a will, the probate courts will follow your instructions and make sure things go where you want them to go. So besides the details of who gets what, the will should also name an executor, the person or persons who will help administer the payment of your debts and the distribution of your assets, according to how you've instructed them to do so in your will. Probate is not required if the deceased person owned assets of little value. So if you don't have a whole lot in your estate, it doesn't require probate. If the person owned assets jointly with someone else or payable on death to someone else, then it's clear where those go. The other option might be if that person owned assets and named someone else as a beneficiary, so that they have named someone to receive everything, or if all of the assets are in a living trust, and we'll talk about what that is in a little bit. So with good estate planning, you could actually avoid probate, which can be unnecessary drama for those that are still living after you die. So let's talk about wills. Again, this is the legal request for the distribution of your estate. It's important, though, that you realize that your debts get paid off first, and then anything left over is what's distributed. Now, there are a couple of formats that you can use for a will. You can do a holographic will, so that's handwritten, but it can be tricky in terms of validating, because how do we know that someone else didn't forge a will in your name in order to get your stuff? Some states will accept holographic wills, and they have different requirements depending on the state that you're in. And so, for instance, an example of a requirement is that the entire will be in that person's handwriting. And then in California, for instance, the will needs to have a date on it. Another format is the statutory will. So this is a pre-printed will that you can buy from a store or you can download through a software package, and then you fill it out. So this allows you to do it on your own, but you do have to pay that fee for the pre-printed version or the software package. And then there's a formal will, which is where you work with a lawyer or attorney, and you'll work together to create that will, and then you have to sign it in the presence of two witnesses. Let's talk about the types of wills. So a simple will leaves everything to your spouse, and that's usually good enough for most small estates. Then there's the traditional marital share will, where half of your estate goes to your spouse, and then the other half goes to your kids. A stated dollar amount will is just like it sounds. This is where you have specified how much money each of your beneficiaries will get. And then there's a living will, which allows for your wishes to be followed when you're still alive, hence the word living, but you've become physically or mentally disabled and you're unable to act on your own behalf. Another decision that you'll want to make with estate planning is identifying a power of attorney. So this is someone who has the right to act on your behalf, especially when it comes to money or legal decisions. And you can appoint someone, usually a partner or spouse, your child, assuming they're an adult, or even a sibling. Whoever you pick, it should be someone that you trust and that you know makes good decisions and possibly have similar decision making as you, or at least someone that knows what you want and will follow your instructions. There's also a healthcare proxy that you can set up. So this is where you're requesting medical personnel to follow the instructions of a certain family member who expresses your wishes concerning your end-of-life treatment. So perhaps you've already talked to someone in your family, a parent, a spouse, a child, a sibling, and you've expressed to them how you want your final wishes to be for your end-of-life treatment. They can advocate for you with medical personnel and communicate what you want. And you can even formalize this as a medical power of attorney. Now let's talk about trusts and gifts. So a trust is a legal entity created by a trustor or grantor who owns assets managed by a trustee or trustees for the benefit of a beneficiary or beneficiaries. So for example, I have set up a trust, which is a legal arrangement regarding my assets because I own some homes and some bank accounts and different retirement accounts. And it's held by a trustee, so someone that's helping to manage it. And if I were to pass, that trustee would make sure that the assets in my trust go to my beneficiaries. Now, there's a testamentary trust. So this is established by a will so that beneficiaries who are unable to manage assets, like I have very young children, they're all under the age of 6, they can benefit from the assets, but someone else will manage it for them. And then there's the living trust. Again, similar to a living will, this is established while the grantor is still alive. Unlike a will, though, it does not become a matter of public record upon your death. Now, there's two kinds of living trusts. There's the revocable living trust. So that means that you can revoke your living trust and you're still the owner of the assets at any time. And then there's irrevocable living trust. So this cannot be changed. So revocable or irrevocable essentially means change or not change. And the grantor is giving up ownership of those assets and putting it into the trust, again, to avoid probate and estate taxes, but you can't change it. Like, it's in there. So it becomes a separate taxable entity and pays taxes on its accumulated income. And then, of course, there are estate taxes. So these taxes will diminish the value of your estate. And the purpose of estate planning is to try to minimize those taxes that you have to pay out. So a taxable estate is the gross estate less any allowable deductions. And so the tax law defines the gross estate as all the property that you own at the time of death, any life insurance proceeds. So like if you die and you have a life insurance plan, any of the money from that will be payable to your estate or to your heirs. If you have any annuities that are, again, payable to your estate or your heirs, and the value of certain property you transferred within 3 years before your death. So for instance, in California, we don't have an estate tax, but federally, so in the United States, we do have a federal tax that's levied on the right of a deceased person to transmit their property and life insurance when they die. And so estate and trust federal income taxes are part of a federal income tax return that people report to the IRS. Now, inheritance taxes are levied on the right of an heir to receive all or part of the estate, including any life insurance proceeds of the dead person. And then there's gift taxes. So again, there's a federal gift tax, and for some states, they also have a gift tax. California does not. And this is a tax that's levied on the privilege of making gifts to others. Note that many states do have gift tax laws, and they are similar to federal, but in California, we don't have them. So if you want to know the dollar limit of how much you can gift to someone on an annual basis and not get taxed, you'll want to check out the IRS website. But for instance, in 2023, you can give or receive up to $17,000 as a gift and it not be taxed. So for instance, if you received $18,000 from a parent, the first $17,000 is not taxed, and only what's over that, so $1,000 of the 18 would be taxed. Note, in terms of the gift taxes, if you're giving as a couple, the number actually doubles. So for instance, as a married couple, they could give up to $34,000, that's $17,000 doubled, to each of their children. Note that these numbers change on an annual basis, so you'll want to check the IRS website for each calendar year that you are receiving or giving gifts.